My name is Dr. Chris Jenkins, and I am the CEO of the Orianne Society and the host of the Snake Talk podcast, the podcast where you learn about nature's most feared, maligned, and persecuted animals. I invite you to listen to this conversation, and maybe you'll find that what you perceive as fear is actually rooted in a deep fascination. Welcome to the Snake Talk podcast. I am here with my longtime friend, Jimmy Stiles. He's probably one of the first people that I met when I moved to the Southeast. And, we've become friends over the years. In addition to colleagues, we just have a lot of similar interests between, both just loving reptiles and amphibians, in particular snakes, venomous snakes, also both having, an interest in hunting and fishing and kind of lifestyles that are, very connected to the land and sense of place with particular places. So we just have always connected around, a whole variety of things. And we've worked together on indigo snakes in particular in different capacities over the years. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, Jimmy. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on, Chris. It's an honor. You're doing great things with the podcast these days.
Great. Thank you. So as you probably know, I like to, and I know a little bit of this story, but I want the audience to know it. How did you get into this? A lot of, most people think we're kind of strange being into reptiles and amphibians and snakes. So how did this bug first hit you? Is it something, from your childhood, something later in life? How'd that all come together for you?
Oh, it definitely was a childhood obsession. My father was an ichthyologist, so he specialized in studying little fish. But one of his good friends, Ken Marion, was a herpetologist at UAB in Birmingham, and just watching programs that he gave and following him through the woods, I completely rebelled against my father and decided from a very early age that I would become a herpetologist, and just got obsessed with catching snakes, in particular salamanders, really all the herpetofauna. But my first kind of thing that I ever got paid for was going around to houses in my neighborhood and removing snakes from people's yards. Little did they know I'd just take them down to the creek right behind my house and let them go, and then probably slither right back to their backyard. But the people would pay me a little bit of money to go do that. And it started a bad trend of wanting to become a herpetologist. And so ended up, always being interested and always kind of knowing that the profession herpetology existed. Having known Ken Marion, I realized that this is something that someone could actually do. And so ended up getting a bachelor's at Samford University in Birmingham. And while I was getting my bachelor's, I started working at both Oak Mountain State Park and Ruffner Mountain Nature Center there in Birmingham, and started to do a lot with education as far as snakes. Kept a collection of educational animals for both Oak Mountain and Ruffner Mountain, and just got really passionate about it. And then went on to do some research under Craig Geyer, my wife and I. My wife's also interested in snakes, Sierra. And we got to a crossroads in our life. We were kind of looking for a change. And we saw a job posting through Auburn University to work on reptiles and amphibians on a scientific research project as technicians, examining how forestry practices, and in particular fire and fire surrogates, affect herpetofaunal communities down in the Conecuh National Forest. And we were like, well, that sounds really cool. So we applied for the position and got it. It was going to be a 4-month position. And 23 years later, we're still in the Conecuh National Forest.
That's great. So you grew up there in Birmingham area, is that right?
Yeah, grew up in Birmingham, and I used to go to the Birmingham Herpetological Society meetings, which was a small niche group of folks, and those meetings were hosted by Dr. Marion, and just kind of always had an interest up there, and really got into really found a passion for it up in Birmingham. And then when we moved to the Conecuh, it just became an obsession.
Yeah, you say you rebelled from your father, but I'm guessing your father was actually pretty happy that you became a herpetologist. It's pretty adjacent. One of our biggest professional societies, as you know, is ichthyology and herpetology. So I'm sure
Yeah,
he was pretty happy.
yeah, he was pretty excited. I could have been. He kept on trying to get me to be a plumber. He said I would make way more money. One of my good
Hmm.
friends is actually a plumber now, and he does make a lot more money than I do. But I have a wonderful life and have absolutely no regrets getting to be out in the wilds and see all the amazing things that the natural world has to offer.
Yep. Huh. Well, yeah, that's always one of the big decisions for people in life. Do you do something that you really love, and oftentimes that means you make less money. And both of us kind of took that route, and I think it's a pretty fulfilling way to live instead of you know living for the weekend and the living for your retirement kind of thing. So you talked about you always kind of knew that herpetology existed and was an option. A lot of people don't know that growing up, and so that's amazing having those experiences, going to the Herpetological Society there in Birmingham, and then um, going on to school. And so you took this job with Craig, and we'll talk more about Craig. I want to talk a little bit kind of about like the history of herpetology in Alabama in a while. But so you went over to Auburn, and you were working on a project at one point where you were like surveying, I want to say like most of the WMAs or the public land in the state for herps. Was that
Yeah.
part of that time, or was that after your master's?
No, that was before. Well, we did. I've done both, but before we started our master's program, we did have a project. So we did several projects, both under Craig at Auburn University, and also under Dr. Leslie Rissler up at the University of Alabama, that were focused on fire and fire's effects on herpetofaunal communities. But then uh, Craig got a grant to look at species of greatest conservation need across the state, and in particular on state lands properties, so properties owned by the state of Alabama. So that included a lot of wildlife management areas and state parks. And so, yeah, we went all across the state sampling, um, particularly reptiles and amphibians, looking for a species of greatest conservation need. So we spent 3 years traveling the state, going different state lands, and basically just uh, going to random points out in the woods and herping really hard and documenting what we were able to find.
Yeah, that must have been just giving you such an incredible insight, like a breadth of knowledge across the entire state, and going corner to corner. And we'll talk about that because I do want to orient people to Alabama itself and the herpetofauna more generally. Um, but yeah, that's great. Let's talk a little bit about your master's, because this is one of the places that we work together most. So you're working with Craig at Auburn, and then the opportunity comes up to do a master's degree for both you and Sierra, and it's focused around the reintroduction of indigo snakes. So maybe talk a little bit about how that came about, and then we can talk a little bit about the reintroductions in general before we move on as well. So
Yeah, sure. So, um, yeah, we've been working for Craig for so long that he was like, if y'all are going to keep hanging around, y'all are going to have to get a master's degree. And we're like, yeah, we'd love to. And we had originally we were thinking of different things, we could do our masters on, and I'd kind of thought about doing a master's degree on the disappearance of king snakes. As you're well aware, Eastern king snakes have been kind of winking out in different specific populations. The Kaneka National Forest is one of those, and I was interested in investigating that. And so I'd actually kind of like come up with a proposal and stuff. But then the this notion of reintroducing indigo snakes came up, and Sierra and I both were immediately like, "Nope, that's it. We're gonna work on that." And we had gotten to spend some time with Dr. Dan Speak, um, and we surveyed for indigo snakes across some of his original release sites. He had released snakes back in the 80s. So we went in the early 2000s, went to several of his sites and tried to find indigo snakes at those sites, and were unable to document any presence of any sort of viable population created by those. And so early on, we started talking with the non-game coordinator at the time, Mark Sasser, about trying this again, and learning from Dr. Speak's mistakes, and really honing in on a way to actually do this. And the state and of course the Orient Society put forth some money, and all the stars kind of aligned, and we were able to start the Alabama's Indigo Snake Reintroduction Project. And so what we did for our masters was, with the reintroductions, the first snakes that were released, we radio tracked those snakes. And for my masters, I looked at home range use, and also investigated the use of using soft release enclosures, um, and how that might affect the home range as well as the survival of the snakes. And Sierra focused her masters on habitat, and whether the snakes were using habitat appropriately, as well as more fine scale shelter use.
yeah, yeah, that was great. Two great projects, and I was on your both of your y'all's committees,
Yeah, yeah,
and was kind of the beginning of a much broader effort, which has continued to
yeah.
this day, both in Alabama and beyond. Maybe just kind of you want to update folks on kind of where we're all at on the reintroduction of indigo snakes in terms of maybe some important milestones that we've hit. Just anything of interest that you think the audience might be interested in.
Yeah, sure. I mean, um, man, we started that project. We kind of started back in 2008, getting snakes and starting the build up a collection for the captive breeding program that now exists. and getting those snakes to a releasable size. And then we started the actual releases in 2010. It's hard to believe that's 15 years ago. But we to date have now released 320 snakes into the Conecuh National Forest. Our original kind of goal was to release at least 300 in one specific area. So we've crossed that threshold this year, which is pretty exciting. Um, we don't continue to, or we don't plan to stop anytime soon. We're continuing on with the releases in the project because of some modeling that was done by Brian Folt and others that suggested that continuing with that would benefit the population that we've created. We've had a lot of incredible successes. Sierra, for her masters, kind of figured out that the snakes that we were releasing used the landscape appropriately, like the wild snakes do. So they utilize the same habitats and shelters that wild snakes do. Their survival out there was similar to wild snakes. Home range use was similar. It seemed like things were going good. And in the first few years, when we would capture the snakes to switch out the radio transmitters, so the radio transmitters were surgically implanted into the coelomic cavity. During that process, we tended to do that in the early spring, just because of the battery life of the transmitters and stuff. When we started having snakes that laid eggs while they were recovering from surgery, it turns out those eggs were viable. So we were able to document, viable reproduction that was occurring. And then later on, I don't know, it's probably been 4 or 5 years ago, we started finding young snakes that were clearly born in the wild out on the forest. So, we've really kind of ticked off a lot of the big milestones for any sort of reintroduction project. And in my personal opinion, it seems like it's definitely a successful project.
Yeah, that's great. And we also have we brought a second, not in Alabama, but in Florida, brought a second reintroduction site
Yeah.
online and have been seeing kind of similar general results in terms of, seeing, young snakes in the wild and seeing snakes appear to be doing what snakes in wild natural populations do. So,
Yes.
yes, that's great. Maybe tell, before we leave the reintroductions here, tell the audience about. I remember one of the first days you went out to track snakes, and we kind of had that question, like, are these snakes going to function normal in the wild? Are they going to be
Sure.
able to eat and find habitat? But maybe tell that story, if you know the story I'm telling about,
Yeah,
like one of the
I
first
know
snakes you ever
exactly
went
what
to.
you're talking about. I can't lie. I would have told that as my ending snake story, but thanks for the opportunity to replace that with a different one
Okay,
and
okay,
tell this
perfect.
story. But yeah, it was pretty awesome. So the first release that we did way back in 2010, it was a pretty chaotic day. We had, of course, a lot of media present, a lot of a lot of dignitaries, a lot of political folks. Kind of everybody wanted to be involved. So we released the snakes. And we had a television film crew from Alabama Public Television down, and they wanted to do a documentary about the reintroduction project. And it was kind of chaotic. And I was like, hey, why don't y'all come back tomorrow? Uh, Things will be a lot more settled down, and we can, do some filming about the project. And so we plan to meet first thing in the morning out at the release site and radio track the snakes. So we uh, meet up in the morning, and I got there just a few minutes early. Um, and kicked on the receiver and was like, "Oh, there's a snake right over here. Let's go see what this snake's doing." And I walked over, and as I walk over, the snake had clearly just grabbed pretty large copperhead and what had subdued it and was beginning to swallow this copperhead. And about that time, the film crew showed up. And they jumped out of the car, grabbed the cameras, and we were able to film that copperhead being swallowed by an indigo snake. And we thought, well, this is definitely a good sign for the project. I mean, the first few years, a lot of those snakes, that snake in particular, had been raised on frozen thawed mice because they're easy to procure and, a common food for snakes. And so that particular snake had never even eaten a snake before. And I thought, well, this is a good sign that we release it. And within just a matter of a few hours, it had tracked down, killed, and consumed a copperhead, which, of course, indigo snakes are, largely ophiophagus. And so, it was a great sign that they found their one of their main natural foods. And over the course of the project, we were able to observe many more snakes that had found prey items and were consuming them.
Yeah, I love that story. It's great.
Yeah, it
Well,
was. It
let's
was.
let's yeah, let's move on from your masters, and we may come back to indigo snakes later in the conversation. But let's move on, and before we get talking a little more broadly about Alabama and some of the other things you've been doing, let's talk a little bit about your PhD. So you finished up your masters at Auburn, and then how did you find your way into doing your PhD, and what's been the focus of your PhD? Just kind of tell us all about that.
Yeah. So. Um, uh, After my master's, I took a little break and ended up working with the Alabama Natural Heritage section on a project looking at aquatic herpetofauna across the state in several different rivers of high conservation concern in our state. And it was a really exciting project. And then we actually did some more stuff with the indigo snakes, looking at the kind of the prey responses. So, indigo snakes being kind of an apex predator, so to speak. Looking at how the reintroduction might affect those prey resources, and did several different projects. But an opportunity came up to work out at one of my favorite places in the state on a PhD looking at Chinese privet and using non herbicide ways to get rid of it. So, in particular, fire. A lot of my work, of course, in the past is focused on fire and fire ecology. And I thought, we could probably use fire to get rid of privet. Um, but of course, being a herpetologist, I wanted to throw something reptile and amphibian related. So we also looked at how privet invasion and infestation affects herpetofaunal communities, as well as how the restoration with fire plays into those herpetofaunal shifts. And uh, wrapped up the field work. The short of it is we were able to get rid of privet using fire, both prescribed fire as well as high intensity propane torches. And then also wrapped up our herpetofaunal sampling. Didn't find a lot of shifts between the privet infested areas and the non privet infested areas, although there were a few differences there, particularly to habitat structure that relate to herpetofauna. Um, uh, but um, but yeah, now I've got the dissertation written, and I'm kind of in the editing, the last of the editing phase of the dissertation. So hopefully I can
Gotcha.
get a committee to let me out before too long here.
Yeah. So you'll be defending, I'm assuming, soon.
Yes, yes, as soon as I can. So that'll be exciting.
Hey everybody, I just wanted to take a break to let you know that you can stay connected to the Orianne Society by signing up for our monthly newsletter. Be the first to receive exciting updates on reptile and amphibian conservation, from the latest news and staff blog posts to exclusive announcements like upcoming Snake Talk podcast guests. Go to our website at www.orianne.org and sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of our homepage. Well, let's broaden it back out and talk about Alabama in general a little bit, and the herpetofauna, and then we'll kind of focus back in on some things you've been doing. And I've already talked about. I talked about kind of my intro, how you kind of have a sense of place, and you've moved. We didn't mention it, but you live primarily down in the Conecuh National Forest, and I kind of, the way I picture you from the outside is like kind of Mr. Conecuh, and that's from all from reptile amphibian perspective, from like a hunting fishing perspective, just like one of the people who knows as much about that piece of ground as anybody. And then scaling that out to the state, you also have a much higher level of knowledge. As we mentioned, you've had multiple projects that have taken you to kind of every corner of the state. And I kind of feel the same way here for myself with the Chattahoochee National Forest that I live in the middle of, and spend an incredible amount of time in, both working and recreating. So I mentioned this kind of similarity we have, but I want to talk about Alabama, and again, because of those things, I think you're one of the perfect people to do that. So let's first of all, it's kind of like the backdrop before we start talking about the reptiles and amphibians. Tell us about Alabama? And I say that I told you before we started recording that, like, before I moved to the Southeast and spent much time in all of these states, like, I was up in the Rocky Mountains, and if you said Mississippi and Alabama, I mean, I wouldn't have imagined them to be much different, meaning like
Sure.
topographically, ecosystem wise, water wise, all these things. But the truth is, they're incredibly different. And so, could you just kind of give people a high level overview of how the state of Alabama kind of lays out, and
Sure.
why that's so important for biodiversity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, um, so Alabama is an incredibly biodiverse state. I think a lot of people, even people in the state, don't realize the incredible biodiversity that is contained here in Alabama. We've got the tail end of the Appalachian Mountains that comes in to the northeastern side. We have many different physiographic provinces in our state. The fall line, which separates the more mountainous physiographic provinces with the coastal plain regions, is captured within the state. And we have several major watersheds captured within the state. We have the Alabama watershed, which is an incredibly diverse watershed as far as aquatic species. We also have the Tennessee watershed, again, another really incredible aquatic watershed, and then we have several coastal watersheds that flow through Alabama and then through the Panhandle down into the Gulf of Mexico directly. So it sets up that we have an incredible diversity, both geologically, physiographically, hydrologically, and of course that relates to our biota and our biodiversity. Alabama is ranked, we're now fourth in the nation for overall biodiversity, which is pretty incredible, and number one east of the Rocky Mountains. Um, well, east of the Mississippi River, um, for biodiversity. So it's an incredibly diverse place, which is why I love the state, and Conecuh in particular is an incredibly herpetofaunally rich place. The Conecuh has some of the highest herpetofaunal diversity of anywhere in the nation, and we have a lot. I like to put it as we're kind of in a Goldilocks zone, right? We get the tail end of the a lot of the northern stuff. We're the southernmost distribution of those species, and we're also the northernmost distribution of a lot of what we think of as real southern species that occur down in Florida. So um, we're kind of in a sweet spot there for diversity, and that's definitely why I love the Conecuh is the incredible reptile and amphibian diversity that we have here.
Hmm. And talk, drill in a little bit more with snakes, and
Yeah,
talk about snake diversity in the state and kind of how they distribute themselves.
sure. Yeah, so we have a really rich snake diversity in the state. We have somewhere around 45 species, depending on what taxonomy you want to follow. Of course, snake taxonomy is changing a lot the last few years. So, it's kind of hard to nail down an exact number of species these days. But we have around 45 species. Again, have northern species such as, prairie king snakes and things like that come into the northern portion of the range. Some of the eastern and red milk snakes. Up there. But then you get down into the south, and we have species, of course, like the indigo snake, rainbow snakes, mud snakes, things like that down the south.
You have
Even
Florida pines down there, I'm assuming, and
yeah, we've got kind of all three of the pines. We have black pines in the Mississippi, or I mean, on the Mississippi border in Mobile and Washington, Choctaw counties. So we got the black pines. We got Florida pines throughout the coastal plain regions of Alabama, and northern pines in the northern portion. And
yeah,
so we also
very
have
cool.
that integration zone where all where they kind of all meet. And again, with the king snakes is the same way. When you look at the range maps of the king snakes, I won't go in the king snake taxonomy, but we're kind of where all the different species or subspecies, however you want to lay that out, intersect right in kind of the center of
Hmm.
the state. So yeah, we have just an incredible. When you look at the range maps of a lot of these, snakes, Alabama is kind of at the center of where a lot of those, species come together.
Yeah, yeah, gotcha. How about venomous snakes? How many species do you have, and are they, kind of uniformly distributed across the state, or do you find certain species in certain regions?
Yeah, so we have all six of the venomous species that occur in um, the southeastern U.S. Um, you know, not excluding, I guess, taxonomic changes to cottonmouths and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but they, things like the Eastern diamondback rattlesnake, only occur in the lower coastal plain regions. Um, and pygmy rattlesnakes are one of those species that, when I'm doing educational programs, I always tell people the closer you get to the Gulf, the better your chances of finding pygmy rattlesnakes. So the distribution of pygmy rattlesnakes, technically they're found throughout the entire state, but they're incredibly rare in the northern portions of the state. But the closer you get to the Gulf, the more common they become. And when you get down to Gulf Shores, Alabama, and Mobile counties, things like that, pygmy rattlesnakes can be incredibly common in the maritime forests there. That'd be the dusky pygmy rattlesnake. Um, Coral
Mm.
snakes have a very weird distribution in Alabama. They're, of course, known from the longleaf pine and the lower coastal plain regions, but they've actually been documented in some of our montane longleaf up in the Valley Ridge provinces in our state and the kind of north central regions of the state, which is just weird. And of course, cottonmouths and copperheads and timber rattlesnakes are found pretty much statewide, with the exception of timber rattlesnakes and copperheads fall out, 50, 60 miles from the coast. You stop getting those species.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Well, so the Alabama's always been interesting to me in that there are some states that that people kind of have like a lot of pride in, and that political boundary becomes really important for things they do. And so if we think like herpetology and herpetologists, that there are many herpetologists across the country who work. You might have somebody completely hypothetical that's in Maryland, but they're working in Colorado and Belize or whatever it might be, and
Sure.
and you have herpetologists in Alabama, I'm sure, that work other places as well, or have worked other places, do some of that on the side. You probably do that, but to me, it seems like as much as any state, there's an interesting history of herpetology where you have a number of herpetologists that are especially focused within those political boundaries of where they live. Again, people,
Yeah.
they've worked beyond it, but I'm just curious if you could you've already mentioned a few names, but maybe give just a high level kind of like herpetological history in Alabama and some of the big names and what they did.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the biggest names in Alabama herpetology, um, is Dr. Robert Mount, Bob Mount. This year actually marks the 50th year of the first printing of his seminal work, The Reptiles and Amphibians of Alabama. Dr. Mount um, taught at both Montevallo, University of Montevallo, as well as then is better known from his time at Auburn University. He was professor emeritus from Auburn University, and really focused a lot of his work on Alabama and creating an incredible, reptile and amphibian collection that's now housed in the Auburn Museum of Natural History. With I can't even remember how many tens of thousands of specimens the herp collection alone constitutes, but I know it's over 40,000 specimens at this point, from, you know, of course, all over the world, like you said, but also a large portion of that collection is from Alabama specific. One of his colleagues, Dan Speak, is kind of like I consider him the godfather, and Johnny Appleseed of Indigo Snakes. He did a lot of work on some of the very early work on indigo snake reintroductions. And then Bob Mount's predecessor, Dr. Craig Geyer, is who we were able to work on, get our masters under and worked with for many years. Craig has since retired and is a professor emeritus there, but um, um, yeah, we've been blessed to have a lot of people in the state that have worked on reptiles and amphibians. We've got some big names in herpetology that have come from here.
Hmm. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit about outreach and education. I know that's been like a really important kind of through line throughout your career. You mentioned early on in Birmingham getting involved with these two centers, and maybe we'll start there. Talk a little bit about your those two places and kind of your experiences there and how that's carried forward for you.
Yeah, I mean, um, you know, one of my first career, kind of starts in my career would be both with the Boy Scouts of America. I did some. I worked at a Boy Scout camp and helped work on the nature hut, and got to help with the reptile and amphibian merit badges and stuff like that. But then I started working at Oak Mountain State Park as a naturalist. Um, Already had a deep passion for reptiles and amphibians, and the state parks were kind of like, we'd love for you to do interpretive programs. What you do is kind of your choice. Well, obviously, started to do a lot of reptile and amphibian programs and education um, there at the park. Worked, then moved to Ruffner Mountain Nature Center again. People, as you know, are fascinated with reptiles and amphibians. So our nature center housed a lot of educational animals, primarily reptiles and amphibian species, and we, just, I mean, day in, day out, did educational programs, many of which related around reptile and amphibian, uh, both safety as well as conservation. And then after leaving those areas, I've always kind of had a passion for that. I've been involved with our state's environmental education association for uh, I don't know, close to 30 years now, and it's just always been a passion of mine. So people after I left those two nature centers, they really wanted outreach and education programs. So in our spare time, just when we had off days or whatever from all the trapping and scientific research we were doing, we would go and do educational programs, uh, at schools and for different groups, Boy Scout groups, or um, you know, uh, just anything really. And it, we started doing that, and honestly, it's just kind of snowballed from there. I've got contracts with, power companies and nonprofit organizations and educational institutions to do programs, and honestly, currently, right now, what I do the most of is education related to reptiles and amphibians. Um, I keep a small educational collection, and Sierra runs a science center called Turtle Point Science Center, about an hour west of us, and they have a extensive reptile and amphibian collection. And we both do now separately instead of together a lot of educational programs, throughout the state, both for schools, but also like this summer, a lot of what I do is educational programs for educators. So teaching the teachers about our biodiversity and about reptiles and amphibians, snakes and snake safety. Um, so yeah,
And
it's been.
did you create your own do you have your own nonprofit now that houses some of that? I'm trying to remember. I want to say you said that at one point to me, but I may have that wrong.
Yeah, no, I don't have a nonprofit. So I am an LLC. So it is a for-profit company. Um,
Gotcha.
but yeah, it's I've considered just I'm considering doing a nonprofit organization just to kind of simplify things and make it easier to get grants and stuff like that.
Yeah. How do
But
people, if people are interested in reptile
those.
programming, how do they find that nonprofit? Or I'm sorry, how do they find the LLC?
They can just contact me directly. Most people, I don't really advertise, honestly, Chris. I stay so busy doing educational programs that I don't advertise anymore or anything like that. It's just word of mouth, but people are welcome to contact me. I will say, definitely contact me well in advance of a program you're thinking about having me come out to do. Um, but I work a lot with other nonprofit organizations. And more recently, I've been partnering with the Alabama Cooperative Extension Program here in Alabama to provide venomous snake programs for primarily first responders.
Hmm. Yeah, I was gonna want to dive into that a little bit deeper because I knew in recent handful of years, like you've had a real focus on venomous snakes. So talk about that more. So you're going out and you're working with, whatever it might be, fire stations or police. How does that work? What are you teaching them about venomous snakes and basically how does that all work? Hey, everybody. I just wanted to take a quick break and tell you that the Orion Society is dedicated to protecting some of North America's most at risk species and their habitats, like Eastern Indigo Snakes in the longleaf savannas, Eastern Hellbenders in the Appalachian Highlands, and wood turtles in the Great Northern Forests. Healthy ecosystems depend on these incredible animals, but these landscapes and species need our help to survive. If you care about reptiles, amphibians, and the wild places they call home, visit www.orien.org to learn more about our work and how you can get involved.
It kind of started a friend of mine who runs the Alabama Herpetological Society. Um, uh, just kind of hit me up one day and was like, "Hey, you do a lot of work with venomous snakes, and I get questions all the time about venomous snakes, and people want to know, kind of how to work with venomous snakes." And I got to thinking back, um, all that work, nobody ever trained me how to work with venomous snakes. They were kind of like, I remember a time when, tubing venomous snakes became a thing. And Craig bought us a set of venomous snake tubes and was like, here, here's some tubes. Go figure out how to use those, and etc. There was no like formal sort of training that people could go to and kind of lessen the curve of how to deal with these potentially dangerous snakes. And so we're like, hey, well, maybe we should do that. Offer a class, and so Raymond and I offered a couple of classes, and I mean the first class that we advertised filled up in less than 15 minutes. And I was like, whoa, we had tone this down some. I don't, there's a lot of demand out here. So we did a few programs, and then very quickly we got approached by law enforcement agencies, particularly animal control workers. Wanted to get training because, again, same sort of thing. They got training on how to deal with dogs and how to shoot guns, and but nobody ever trained them on how to deal with venomous snakes, and they get lots of, as you can imagine, venomous snake calls. And so we were like, well, we need to develop a class for this. So we kind of developed a class with the thought in mind, if someone dials 911 and says, hey, there's a rattlesnake in my garage, um, what does the person that's going to have to respond to that, because somebody's going to have to go to there, what do they need to know about venomous snakes? So um, we developed a class. And like I said, now we're partnering with the Alabama Extension Service to put these classes on. We've been doing that the last, uh, 4 years, I think now. And we've been able to do programs for close to 500 first responders throughout the state. Um, and the class goes through identification. We bring in live examples of all of the venomous species that are found in the state. Um, we go through, of course, the identification, bites and bite protocols, what to do if someone is bitten, and then the equipment, tongs, hooks, buckets, things like that to safely relocate snakes. And then we also have a portion of the class where we work one on one individually with the individuals in the class, getting them comfortable, you know, putting snakes in and out of buckets, and being able to do a relocation, because in the past a lot of people would just show up and try and kill the snake or something like that, and as that's not good for the snake, and it's also not the safest way to deal with the situation for the people involved. So we're trying to bridge that gap and make these calls both safe for the snake as well as safe for the people that are responding to those situations. And it's been incredibly successful. I'll be doing another one in Troy next week or week after next, something like that. And then we have some more in September, and then hopefully we just put in for another big grant, and so we'll have a whole new series of those that'll be done throughout the entire state next year.
Hmm. Well, you got to be careful, or that'll become a full-time job there.
Yeah, it really has. Like I said, it's snowballed. The amount of requests we get, and of course, we want to provide these for free, because one of the big barriers in people getting trained is the cost, because sadly, I think a lot of these departments don't value it as much, and so, if it costs a lot to send their officers or their firefighters or their EMTs to this class, they're going to be like, nah. But if we can provide it for free, we found that, people are much more receptive. And so we've been trying to get grants and things like that to allow us to put on these programs, at no cost to the participants, so that we can
Yeah.
get more and more people, with at least the basic knowledge on how to deal with a venomous snake situation.
Yeah.
I should also
Well,
say we've partnered with the Alabama State Parks as well to train people in Alabama state parks, particularly the law enforcement, naturalists, things like that, on how to deal with venomous snake situations as well.
Yeah. Huh, cool. Well, let's zoom back out to the state level, and what would you say are some of the greatest snake related priorities in the state of Alabama? Those could be priorities that take on, could be different things. They could be, um, we've talked a little bit about the reestablishment of indigo snake populations. You talked about, understanding why king snakes are disappearing. It could be, but what do you think the top snake priorities are for, continuing to maintain sustainable populations of snakes in the state?
I mean, I think, obviously, educating as our population grows, educating people about snakes, um, it certainly would rank up there. The less people fear them, and the more people understand about snakes, the less likely they are to kill them or have some sort of animosity towards them. Um, from a conservation level, obviously, with most of our wildlife species, habitat is huge, right? So being able to conserve habitats, Alabama is 90% private land. So, increasing any public land, and particular conservation lands that have high, conservation value as far as habitats for snakes is huge. Understanding disease and you know pathogens, whether it be snake fungal disease or whatever is happening with our poor king snakes and other species, would be really important. And then, of course, the work like the indigo snake reintroductions, continuing that and potentially even looking at other sites in Alabama down the road, and potentially even reintroductions of other species, maybe the eastern king snake, where in portions where they've disappeared, and then finally, just having an understanding of our populations throughout the state. There's not a lot of work being done monitoring our snake populations here in Alabama, and so having some sort of scientific population assessments throughout the state to see how are our populations doing. Are king snakes disappearing from other places? Are other species starting to decline? So just getting even baseline information across large areas of our state would be very important for understanding population dynamics, and whether those populations are increasing or decreasing, would be key to conserving those species.
Okay, great. Well, so you've had you're doing a ton of education outreach around reptiles and amphibians. You've done a lot of research over the years. You've done a lot of land management related work. So and you're finishing your PhD. So what does the future hold? Are you looking to move into academia with as a freshly minted doctor, or are you going to expand in the outreach, or kind of continue to do a little bit of everything? What's the plan going forward with your career?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, when I wrap up this PhD, I might have to take a break from academia for a little bit. I've basically been involved in some sort of academia my entire life. And so, taking a little bit of a step back wouldn't be bad for that. I'm not looking to, uh, jump right into, the role of a professor somewhere. But I do love the education. So working with, continuing with the educational work that I do, I don't think I could ever stop doing that. Potentially, working on some of these projects as far as from a scientific research perspective, is a goal of mine. Help maybe potentially understanding, how our populations are doing, particularly with our species of highest conservation concern. Um, but yeah, just kind of keep on keeping on, seeing what other kind of cool, projects and things like that come up. It seems like every time I turn around, there's some neat thing that sucks me in. So waiting to see what
Mm-hmm.
the snake vortex draws me into.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, well, before we take this one in for a landing, as you know, I like to have all my guests tell me one of their best snake stories. So, do you have a snake story for us?
Sure. I mean, I'm so glad you let me tell the story of the indigo snake earlier because that's clearly one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a lot. It's tough to pick one, but I got one that kind of sums up things from my early childhood. So like I said, my father is an ichthyologist and studied fish, and he primarily worked on like behavioral stuff with fish. So he would strap on a mask and snorkel, get down in the river, and observe and film fish breeding and doing all their fishy things. Um, and as a little kid, I kind of got drug along with him. And so one day we were down on the Cahaba River, and we were, out in the river, and my dad was downstream of me, and he was looking at some fish. I don't know, some little darter down on the bottom of the stream, trying to do some film, and I was upstream of him fishing, and apparently was like kicking up some sediment or something. And he eventually got frustrated and was like, "You need to go sit on that rock." And I was like, "Oh, okay, fine, you know." So I went over to go sit on this rock on the side of the river, and there was a juvenile cottonmouth already perched on said rock. And I was like, well, I'm probably not going to sit there. So I started to wade back across the stream, and he was like, I told you to go sit on that rock. And I was like, well, there's a cottonmouth on the rock. And he was like, there's no cottonmouths in this section of the river. That's just a banded water snake. And even at a very young age, one of the first things I learned was how to identify venomous snakes. And I was like, "No, Dad, it's a little cottonmouth with a juvenile green tail." And he was like, "That's a water snake." And I was like, "Well, come over here, and I'll show you why it's a cottonmouth." And so he walked over and pointed at the cottonmouth and told him all about the bands, and the pattern and the green tail and the fact that it's opening its mouth and gaping at me while I'm pointing it. All indicate that is a cottonmouth and not a at the time, what they called a banded water snake or midland water snake. And he was like, "Yeah, I guess you're right. Um, we'll go sit on that rock." And he pointed to another rock across. I decided I would just wade much further downstream to not get in his way and continue on with my fishing adventures for the day. Uh, as I recall, I ended up catching a big old red horse on a worm, little piece of
Oh,
worm.
really? Interesting.
Yeah, yeah,
Huh.
big
Yeah.
old stallion red
Yeah.
horse.
Kind of reminds me that story. You and I were fishing a few years ago, and a story of finding cottonmouths in places where they're not
Yeah.
commonly found. And we found that actually it was a really big cottonmouth.
Yeah, really big cottonmouth. And I was up there in that same river this past weekend and saw a big cottonmouth swim all the way across the river while I was standing out there fly fishing, and thought of you. I was like, last time I saw a cottonmouth up there, I was fishing with Chris Jenkins.
Oh, that's great. Love it. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's always great talking with you, and I'm glad we could share some good information about Alabama with all the audience.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure, Chris. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and keep up the great work, man.
That sounds good. And I just wanted to thank the audience and tell everybody to remember, snakes are animals too, and it's a privilege to see one in the wild.